Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is David Kennedy, and I was a one-time founding director of the Bill Lane Center for the American West, and I think that's why I got the assignment of getting us going here this afternoon. This annual event awarding the Knight-Risser Prize for Western Environmental Journalism is a joint enterprise between the Bill Lane Center for the American West and the John S. Knight Journalism Fellowships Program. And of course, the prize bears the names not only of Knight, for the obvious reason, but also the name Jim Risser, who I'm very happy to see is with us here this afternoon. Jim was a longtime director of the Knight Fellows Program. I think, Jim, you were the director when it was still called the Professional Journalism Fellowships? Or was it always Knight in your time?
Always.
Oh, okay. Well, it makes even more sense that Knight name is attached to yours than the prize name. Okay. Jim himself is a two-time Pulitzer Prize winner when he was at the Des Moines Register, and led the, well, I guess it was always called in his time, the Knight Fellowships, Journalism Fellowships Program here with great distinction and creativity. So the university is very proud to have his name attached to this prize, and the Lane Center is very, very proud to be associated with the Knight Fellowship Program and with Jim Risser's name. This is the 13th year in which the Knight-Risser Prize has been awarded, and we're delighted today to congratulate the people who won it this year, Nina Satija, Ryan Murphy, and Kia Collier from the Texas Tribune, and Jeff Larson and Al Shaw from ProPublica. And we have Nina and Jeff with us here this afternoon, and they will be up here on this stage in a little bit, talking about their work for a series called Hell and High Water, which deals with Houston's vulnerability to flooding and hurricane damage. And they turned out to be quite prescient in the things they had to say, and Mother Nature gave a demonstration of the aptness of their reporting. I'm also pleased to welcome here this evening the people who agreed to comment on Nina's and Jeff's work for the purpose of enlightening all of us about what it takes to make high-quality journalism of this sort. Cheryl Phillips, another two-time associate with Pulitzer Prizes in 2009, 2014, when she, I think both occasions you were at the Seattle Times. And you don't know this, I suspect, but I was on the Pulitzer Prize board when we gave you the prize in 2009, so it's a great pleasure for me to see you in person and welcome you to Stanford. And we also have with us David Hayes, who will be commenting on the panel. He's twice served as the Deputy Secretary of the Interior. He's just now teaching at Stanford Law School, and he's about to take up a new position as the Executive Director of the State Energy and Environmental Impact Center at the NYU School of Law. And even more important than that, in his list, a long list of achievements and credentials, he's a longtime member of the Advisory Council for the Bill Lane Center for the American West. So with that, I'm going to pass the baton to Don Garcia, who's actually going to make the award presentations, and that'll be followed, I believe, by the panel discussion, correct? So welcome to you all.
I'm Don Garcia. I am the director of the John S. Knight Journalism Fellowships Program, and very pleased to see all of you here for the awarding and the symposium of the Knight-Risser Prize Symposium for Western Environmental Journalism. I was also running the judging of the contest this year for the first time, and there was no question which stories were going to win, because this is such an amazing piece of work, and we're going to hear a lot more about that tonight. I'm really honored. My role right now is to introduce Jim Risser, who is a pioneer of Western environmental journalism. He's also the emeritus director, two directors before me, of the John S. Knight Journalism Fellowships, and for whom the Risser part of the Knight-Risser Prize for Western Environmental Journalism was named. So Jim is really an outstanding figure in 20th century journalism. He was a very tenacious investigative reporter. He focused some of his best work on environmental journalism. And he's been a leader in the efforts to improve the quality of journalism for his entire career, including a number of years here at Stanford. Jim was born in Nebraska and got his law degree from the University of San Francisco. But luckily for us, he decided to go into the very lucrative career of journalism. He was, his entire journalism career was at the Des Moines Register. We have a fellow from the Des Moines Register, Lisa Rossi, right here. He was at the Washington Bureau for most of his career, where he won, not one, but 2 Pulitzer Prizes. So the values that are embodied in the award that we're giving tonight are really exemplified in Jim's career. He was, as I said, won 2 Pulitzers. His first was for national reporting in 1976. It was a year-long series of stories from the Des Moines Register about widespread conflict of interest and corruption in agencies that were supposed to be inspecting U.S. grain shipments abroad, but obviously weren't. 2 years later, in 1979, he won his second Pulitzer, which uncovered a major and unforeseen before environmental crisis. He wrote a series of articles explaining how modern American farming practices were damaging the environment through severe soil erosion, depletion of water supplies, and contamination by agricultural chemicals. This 6-month investigation revealed that agricultural topsoil was being lost at a pace twice as fast as the topsoil could replace itself. In his post-Des Moines Register career, he became a leader in the efforts to improve journalism more broadly. He was a member of the Pulitzer Board for 9 years and its co-chair for 1 year. One of my favorite anecdotes about Jim and the Pulitzer Board is that when he was on the Pulitzer Board, he championed a Pulitzer for a groundbreaking play about the AIDS epidemic, Angels in America. He was the only Pulitzer Board member who had actually seen the play, so it was up to him, and it won the prize. Perhaps his most important legacy, in my view, is the 283 journalists who were John S. Knight Fellows during the 15 years he was director of the fellowship program. They include other Pulitzer Prize winners, accomplished writers, photographers, editors, deans of journalism schools around the world, and me. I was very happy to have Jim be the director when I was a fellow here at Stanford. And there are 2 Jims. Is Jim Bettinger here? There's Jim. So we had 2 Jims for a while. Jim Bettinger was the deputy director and Jim Risser was the director. As fellows, we would say, what do the Jims think about this? When Jim Risser retired from the fellowship, grateful alumni created the Knight-Risser Prize for Western Environmental Journalism, which has become the Knight-Risser Prize, which, as David Kennedy said, is celebrating its 13th year. And now, while Jim may first appear like a stoic, kind of quiet Midwesterner, Jim, like me, is an optimist about the power of journalism to do good in the world. And I love this quote that I have seen a few places from Jim about journalism. And he references the words of Wallace Stegner, who's an American novelist, short story writer, environmentalist, historian, and Stanford faculty member, for which the Stegner Fellows, the creative writing program, is named here at Stanford. And Wallace Stegner really loved the West. And when Jim was director, he started Wallace Stegner coming to talk to the fellows, and my fellowship year was the last year before Wallace Stegner, unfortunately, was killed in a car accident, that we were able to hear him speak, and it was an impressive thing. So I just want to end with this quote, and then I'm going to turn it over to Jim, who's going to give the awards. So this is Jim Risser. If the West represents the geography of hope, as Wallace Stegner said, journalism represents a profession of hope. A hope that through our work, we can inform, educate, and alert citizens to the great issues of the day and can inspire them to get out there and do the things that need to be done. Thank you, and welcome, Jim Risser.
Okay, hello everybody. I'm grateful to be here today to present this prize to the winners, and I do thank all the people that have been so important in sponsoring this award, including David Kennedy, who you heard from a little bit ago, who was very instrumental in getting the Knight Foundation to help support the award. And I'm grateful to the director of the Knight Fellowships, Don Garcia, the past director, Jim Battinger, and to Jeff McGehee and others from the Lane Center. And I'm proud to have my name attached to this prize because I believe that the prize encourages and rewards journalists who do vital reporting on the threats that always exist to the rugged and yet vulnerable Western environment. Before we have the winners come up, I want to recognize two other entries that the judges found very impressive and awarded them a special citation. Those were, one was for toxic armories, an 18-month investigation by Rob Davis of the Oregonian of Portland, which uncovered lead contamination at hundreds of National Guard armories, which led to a shutdown of lots of armories, including one in the town I now live in, Ashland, Oregon, while they cleaned up the lead contamination. It was a brilliant piece of reporting. The other special recognition award was for the toxic air that Latinos breathe, which is by Jose Corbella and Clemente Alvarez of Univision Noticias, which was a series detailing the poor air quality that's found, unfortunately, in Hispanic neighborhoods all across the United States. So, I want to present the awards now to the winners, and I'd like the two who are representing the team of 5 to come up here, if you would. You've already heard that this year's prize was won by the Texas Tribune and by ProPublica for their joint project titled Hell and High Water. And the two people who are with us here today are Nina Satija of the Texas Tribune and Jeff Larson of ProPublica. This was an amazing piece of work because it essentially predicted a year in advance what we all know happened in Houston. And you will hear more about how their work detailed the threats facing Houston, and yet people were not paying much attention to it until after the tragedy actually happened. They would have every right to say, "We told you so," if they want to, because their work really predicted what happened. So Nina and Jeff, on behalf of yourselves and your colleagues on this story, Kia Collier, am I saying it right? Is it Kia Collier, Ryan Murphy, and Al Shaw, the 5 of them, I'm pleased to present you with the 2017 Knight-Risser Prize. I have a plaque here for both of them. There's yours, Nina.
Thank you.
They might like to take a picture of it. They're going to hold that up. And the other 3 people who are part of this will get their plaque as well. And each of them is getting a check. And the check is, as they say, in the mail, although these days it's electronic mail, but it will appear, we promise. So congratulations to the two of you.
Thank you so much, Jim, and Dawn, and for kind of introducing us, and thanks to everyone for coming for this incredible event. I'm going to talk for a few minutes, and then I'll hand it over to Jeff, just about kind of the genesis of this project and why we decided to do this. I think for me, this project started actually, I would say 5 years ago, thinking about this type of issue. I was actually living in New Haven, Connecticut. I'd graduated and I was working for a couple of different news organizations called the Connecticut Mirror, which is a nonprofit news organization based in Hartford, Connecticut, as well as Connecticut Public Radio. And I was there during Hurricane Sandy. And we thought Hurricane Sandy was going to be really bad for the Connecticut coast. And ultimately, I actually remember, I was covering it at the time, and we just sort of had to stay inside, when the storm was going to make landfall. And I was, sitting on my couch watching TV, and all of a sudden the governor of Connecticut comes on. I think it was around midnight, and he really looked just terrified, and he said, we have not enough people have evacuated. We're expecting a devastating storm surge on the Long Island Sound. And, if you haven't evacuated and you live right on the coast, you need to get on your roof. He said there's going to be significant loss of life, and that just really made an impression on me. What ended up happening was I think the storm moved more slowly than expected, and it kind of hit New York in a way that it didn't hit Connecticut. And so I don't know if we even had a single death in Connecticut. We certainly had a lot of destruction. But I felt like the next day and the days after that, nobody talked about that message the governor had given. Nobody talked about what could have happened. I actually had officials in Connecticut tell me later on we were much more prepared for Sandy than New York was, which was just not the case. The state got lucky, and I really became kind of obsessed with this issue. I went around the state trying to look at places that would have been hit. I went to an area that was it was on a beach, but there was an Amtrak rail, that went right through it. I went to some elderly and affordable housing projects that were right on the water that had been badly flooded and were vulnerable to something much worse. And so then I came to the Texas Tribune, and I went to a conference my first few months there about the 5th year anniversary of Hurricane Ike. And I felt like it was like deja vu. Everyone just kept talking about what could have happened in 2008 if Hurricane Ike had taken a slightly different path than it ended up taking. Up until the last minute, just like I remembered with Sandy, the governor of Texas thought we would have significant loss of life in the state, in the Houston area. It was predicted we could have lost thousands of lives. And the only thing that changed, of course, was that the storm turned at the last minute, about 6 hours, I think, before landfall. So it really made an impression on me just having come from Connecticut and having had that experience. And what these scientists were trying to say was, we're not ready, and we should have thought about this more after Hurricane Ike. It's been 5 years. And of course, I learned about the Houston Ship Channel at this conference and how many thousands of storage tanks there are that are vulnerable to some sort of really major chemical or environmental accident. I learned about the significance of the Houston Ship Channel, the amount of money it pumps into our economy, the amount of plastics and important products that are made there every day, the amount of oil that's refined. So, and how vulnerable all of that was. So it really felt like a national story. And I went back to my editors and I said, I really think we should do something bigger on this. I wrote a couple of stories out of the conference, but we couldn't really figure out, it seemed like such an enormous issue, and there was so much incredible data, we just didn't really know where to start. And I think we talked about it for about 1.5 years before realizing that we wanted to do something big, and second of all, that we wanted to team up with ProPublica. And I think those two decisions were really major decisions, and they're a testament to, my editors and ProPublica's editors, people like Emily Ramshaw, who's the editor-in-chief now of the Texas Tribune, Scott Klein of ProPublica, deciding we want to team up and do something big. And I still remember when we actually had the chat on the phone. I think it was with Al Shaw and Scott Klein and maybe some others, giving them our pitch, saying, hey, we think we should work with you on this issue. We think we should do a project on the storm that we know is going to hit the Texas Gulf Coast and is going to hit the Houston Ship Channel one day. And I really thought, actually, that they weren't going to go for it. I thought, coming from Texas, we felt like it was already a well-known story. It had been covered. We had written about it. I'd gone to this conference 2 years earlier, 1.5 years earlier. And so the fact that someone like Al Shaw, who has done all this work with Jeff on the disappearing coast in Louisiana, they're familiar with this area, that they were not that familiar with this story and this issue was a huge deal, I think, to me to hear. That they thought, yes, this is absolutely national news that has not been covered before. And I think that really is a good example of local and national journalism outlets working together. I think a lot of times from the national side, there's this idea you can go and you swoop in, you do your story, you leave. That wasn't going to be the issue here. We had people on the ground, me and Kia and our editors and our reporting colleagues. And then a lot of times local sources feel like, oh, we've been covering this in Texas for a while. It just hasn't gained a lot of traction. Coming to a national outlet and having them say, no, this is a big story. We should tell it to the country, not just to Texas. I think that really is those kinds of decisions and those kinds of visions coming together from two organizations with two different views of how they do journalism and who they do it for was such an important part of making all of this happen. So I just wanted to talk about some of those things when you know, today people are thinking a lot about collaboration and thinking a lot about when it makes sense. And I really feel like it made sense for a national and a local news organization to partner. And it made sense because Kia and I had the reporting chops to do this. We had the local sources. We could go to Houston. I feel like collectively we spent months in Houston reporting this. We knew the scientists. We could go down there and talk to them, although Jeff is going to tell you a story about how much we had to do to convince them to give us their data. And we also, you know, Kia had covered the Port of Houston as a reporter at the Houston Chronicle. She had sources to talk to her about the economic impact of what a storm like this would do. So we had that expertise, and Al and Jeff at ProPublica had expertise that I'm not sure anyone else in the world has over how to take all of this data from these scientists and put it on something that you could view on your mobile phone or on a laptop. And once we realized we could do that, we knew we could really bring something new to the table that hadn't been done before. That was going to be more than just static images. It was going to be more than just text. So that's really how all of this came together. And I think we were able to each bring something to the table that was really unique and was also necessary for the project. And that if it hadn't existed, that project couldn't have existed. So one thing I want to say is Harvey, I think, still was the storm that missed Houston. I mean, there was a point where we thought maybe it would be the big one, maybe it would actually hit the Houston Ship Channel head on. Ultimately, it hit the town of Rockport, Texas, and miraculously, I believe there was very, very few deaths, maybe even only one. There was horrible and devastating destruction that is going to probably take decades before the town and that area recovers. Houston instead got hit with torrential rainfall, which was the worst any American city has, I think, ever had. And actually, after we had done the Hell and High Water project, we heard so much more from people in Houston about their fear of torrential rain than of storm surge and hurricanes. We actually did a follow-up project about it called Boomtown Floodtown, which you can find online, that looks more at what actually happened during Harvey in Houston, that looks at what happens when you have a storm that just comes and it just rains and rains and rains and rains and doesn't stop. And how devastating even that could be. You don't even need the type of storm surge we're talking about in this project to have that kind of impact. So once again, I think Houston dodged the big one. And so the question is, just as it was after Hurricane Ike, is there now going to be, is there now going to be enough attention and willpower to try and get some infrastructure built, get some policy changes, get some money spent before the big one actually hits? And I do think that our project, being there, having talked about and examined this issue, has helped that discussion. I remember when we were doing when we were working on our stories for Hell and High Water, we reached out to the mayor of Houston, and he said, we got a statement from his spokesperson, and it's in the story, trying to argue with us that Houston really wasn't that vulnerable to storm surge. We've had people try to tell us Houston isn't a coastal city. I mean, it's technically inland, but there's the ship channel. It's right on the ship channel. In any case, and he actually told us we should go to. They have this website set up. They're more worried about wind damage in Houston, was his argument. And they even had this website, and I'm not kidding. It was called HoustonHideFromTheWind.com or .org. That was their response. That we're not really that worried about storm surge. We're more worried about wind damage. And of course, our project was all about the impact of storm surge on the ship channel in Houston suburbs like Clear Lake and in the city of Houston as well. But right after Harvey, the mayor was really singing a different tune, and he had started to change his position on this a few months earlier. He actually gave a press conference. I happened to be there at Houston City Hall, where he said, we need to build the Ike Dike, or the coastal spine, and that's one of the major infrastructure solutions that people have been pitching for quite a while now, that scientists have been arguing for, to protect Houston from an event like this. So I think that this storm, it was not the storm that we talk about in Hell and High Water. It was close enough. It was close enough that it's starting this discussion again. Hurricane Ike came at a time when we were reeling from a financial crisis. That's one of the reasons people speculate it wasn't talked about as much, and Texas wasn't talked about as much after the hurricane as maybe things like after Katrina or after Sandy. There was a lot of national discussion. On the other hand, we've had two other hurricanes hit, Puerto Rico and Florida at the same general time. And so it's still a question, I think, whether Congress is going to be willing to step forward to try and fund some of these solutions. I honestly thought that, because something like the Ike Dike wouldn't prevent the type of torrential rainfall and flooding that hit Houston and Harvey, it may be a hard thing for people to recognize that it's a solution that they might want to fund, they might have to pay for. On the other hand, I think it came so close this time too, and people saw the devastation of storm surge in places like Rockport that are a lot less populated than Houston communities in the Houston Ship Channel, that will just, it remains to be seen what Congress decides to do. So that's just a little bit about how our project came to be, and I think it really was about us making a decision to look at this issue in depth, to spend the time and the money, to work with ProPublica and have people like Al and Jeff, spend months of time trying to figure out these problems and trying to figure out how to put this data onto someone's phone and onto someone's laptop. So making that decision is, half the battle, and that's really something that I credit my editors, both our editors at ProPublica and the Texas Tribune for doing. I also want to mention that we did, I also work for Reveal from the Center for Investigative Reporting, and we put together a whole radio show about this issue. It's called Mighty Ike. You can find it wherever you get your podcasts, as they say, or online. And it really takes you through what this storm would be. We start out with an interview with the New York Times-Picayune reporter, New Orleans Times-Picayune reporter, Mark Schleifstein, and he did a project eerily similar to ours about 14 or 15 years ago, looking at what happens when the big one hits New Orleans. And he takes us through that, and then we take you through this storm, and we talk to some of the scientists, including some who live in Houston, of course, who are worried about what's going to happen next. So please take a listen to that if you haven't heard it already. I'm going to show you a little bit, for those of you that haven't seen it. This is what we came up with. This is when you go to the site either from the Texas Tribune or ProPublica, this is the first page you'll see here. And then we'll actually take you through what Hurricane Ike was and what we thought it was going to be. So this is Hurricane Ike. This is Hurricane Ike's actual trajectory in September of 2008. And what's really cool about this is you can actually go back and forth here. You can go through this little time slider of the storm. So 16 hours before landfall, you can slide over and see. Galveston Strand is this street in Galveston that is kind of where everything happens in Galveston. It's the center of town. It's got shops, businesses. It's a lot of fun to be on. And of course, Galveston was really devastated during Hurricane Ike. They had several feet of storm surge, and this is all above land elevation, these numbers. So you can see 8 feet at the Galveston Strand. So imagine, how much that would have been in the street, how much water that would have been in the street. And ExxonMobil Chemical, Johnson Space Center, those are just a couple of landmarks we put in there. So ultimately, those places did not see storm surge. Because the storm didn't hit at the point that scientists and meteorologists thought it would hit at originally. Of course, if it had changed course, if it hadn't changed the course, the damage would have been worse. Sometimes it takes a little bit of time to load here, so we may end up having that problem today. Well, what this should be showing you is how much bigger those numbers would have been had the storm taken the original trajectory that folks thought it would take. So what you can do with this app is you can actually plug in an address in Houston and see how high the water would go. And that was actually something that really informed our reporting. We were able to ask Al and Jeff, tell us where the water gets the highest in this storm, and we went to those places. We ended up going to a town square in a town called Nassau Bay, a suburb of Houston, where the storm surge was going to be 10 to 12 feet in a storm like this, and we're able to talk to the folks about that. Do I have 1 minute before the 20 minutes is up? Sorry. Okay, well, I should hand it over to Jeff. I've lost track of time. And Jeff's going to tell you about some of the incredible technological things that he and Al had to do to make all this happen.
I'm Jeff Larson. I'm a reporter with ProPublica. And as Nina said, after we published this investigation, which is losing ground in 2014, about how Louisiana loses a football field of land every 48 minutes. So since we've sat here, it's lost half a football field of land. Nina and the folks at the Texas Tribune reached out to Al about doing a similar project at Houston. He couldn't be here today because it's his birthday, so happy birthday to him. He gets an award. Thankfully, I just moved to San Francisco, so I get to brag about him and, you know, tell the backstory of the project. Al has this, like many investigative reporters, especially on, you know, the data side, Al has this unfortunate hobby of reading tons of academic papers. His focus is largely about flood and storm models and articles about how to build a levee. So if you guys ever, you know, need to build a levee behind your house, call up Al Shaw. He knows how to do it right. He started, he you know, spent a couple months after the Tribune reached out sort of reading through all the papers, and he noticed that there was this sophisticated computer model called AdCirc that nobody seemed to use. We use these models to predict storm surge in the US government called slosh models, which is an unfortunate acronym, but sounds better than AdCirc, I think. And he reached out to various academics who were using these models. The academic papers he had seen were filled with maps that were all rainbow colored and charts that required a PhD to read. So they weren't something that we could necessarily tell a story with very, very easily. He thought that if he got access to these models, he could use the backing data from these papers to shine a light on how dangerous Houston's situation actually was. And it was locally known that that if a hurricane came to Houston, it would be, you know, sort of devastating. In fact, at one point, people put up these markers that showed where the flood was going to happen, and they were told to take down these markers all around Houston because it was like depressing home values. Al found, and so we sort of scoured the internet to look for the data. We couldn't find the data. Al found a couple of examples of obscure university-run websites, and we quickly fired up scrapers and downloaded as much of it as we could. We don't think that we were supposed to. We think it was just academics sharing it between, with other academics. So my entire career, I've been in news, you know, and doing data journalism for about 10 years now, and largely it's been geographic data. And I can tell you hands down that these AdCirc models were the most complex data that I ever had encountered. I groaned and nearly gave up. It was the most obscure and difficult file format I have ever worked with. We were dealing with files that were designed to be used on supercomputers with thousands of CPUs in essentially unlimited storage, and our plan was to show it on something that worked on your phone. To make things worse, all of the tools for handling these files were written in a computer language that was invented nearly 60 years ago, and one that we had no knowledge of how to use. I was skeptical to pull this off, and I wasn't the only one. The academics that Al had been emailing with did not think that we could handle or understand the data that was behind these computer models. But like all investigative journalists, to us that sounded like a dare. So Al and I sat down and created a rudimentary version of what you guys see in, from the public files that we had downloaded and, that were posted on the internet. The problem with these files is they were all very low resolution, and we couldn't, we wouldn't be able to see, for example, that Galveston had been flooded. After a couple more weeks of emailing back and forth with the academics, Al flew down to Houston, or to Austin, to talk with the academics to show that we could handle the files correctly and to ask them a bunch of questions about how this file format actually worked. The demo went well, the academics were impressed, and they gave us full access to their hurricane models. And that was just the beginning of the story, right? So we had this demo that worked on our very fast computers, but it had no way of working on your phone. We then spent months figuring out how to show this on the web. We came up with a number of innovations, from compressing the files down to small images, and use new technologies like WebGL that are the bleeding edge of internet technology to show what you see above. It was a stressful project. Our boss emailed us the weekend before. It was slated to publish, saying it didn't work on his phone in upstate New York. And Al actually published the final version of the project from a plane on the way to Texas. I'm pretty sure I had bronchitis the final week we were making it, but I didn't go to the doctor. By the end, but the end result is one we're very proud of, and we're honored by this prize. Now, that being said, it shouldn't be this hard to work with these files. These models are definitely in the public interest. If we had visualizations that did this for Puerto Rico, that did this for Florida, that did this around the world, the public would be more informed, and we would be ready for the increasing climate-based disasters that we face as a society. These models are complex, but are a generation ahead of what the government uses for its own flood planning. It's a shame that they're largely hidden on academic hard drives or obscure websites that take two enterprising reporters who know a little bit about web scraping to download. I'd like to take this moment at this university to say that it is beyond important. It is necessary for research like this to be public and made readily accessible, that anyone should be able to work with it, to tell stories like ours, and not just a couple of headstrong reporters in Brooklyn and Texas who won't take no for an answer. It shouldn't take 5 people in a better half of a year to tell stories like this. Thanks, guys.